Today's topic is labor induction. Yeah. So the main content of today's topic is mainly we are going to see the definition. What is the definition of induction of the labor? Then what are the indications and what are the different contraindications for that induction? And mainly we are focusing on the pre-induction cervical ripening. Okay. What are the different pharmacological methods they are available for cervical ripening, non-pharmacological agents available. Then what are the different methods available for the induction of the labor, like the medical method, surgical method, and the combined method. Okay. So basically, first I will describe the definition, then we will see what exactly the labor induction is. What we do, what is the definition? That is the stimulation of contraction. That is before spontaneous onset of labor, with or without ruptured membrane, and that is done for the purpose of vaginal delivery. Okay. What is the augmentation then? It is stimulation of the spontaneous contractions that are considered to be inadequate. And why they are inadequate? Because of failed cervical dilatation and fetal descent. So practically, we are going to see what is the induction and what is the augmentation. Suppose a patient is there. She is around 40 weeks pregnant. She comes to you in the OPD. Okay. And that patient says, I am not having any kind of the pain or the contraction. In that patient, if we are planning for any procedure, okay, either that can be a medical method, either that can be a surgical method, or either it can be the combined method. Okay, that depends upon the examination part. And that patient is not having any kind of the contractions, but we are stimulating her contractions before her spontaneous onset of the labor. That is called the induction of the labor. Okay. And what do you mean by the augmentation? Suppose a patient is there, she is 38 weeks pregnant. Okay. She came to the labor room. She came with the complaint of pain in the abdomen, leaking PV, or the blood stained vaginal discharge. Then I have done her examination and she is having the 4 centimeter cervical dilatation and she is having the contractions. But after the 4 hours, I repeated the per vaginal examination. What should be the normal rate of cervical dilatation? It should be the 1 centimeter per hour. But after 4 hours, she is around 5 to 6 centimeter. What we can say, the spontaneous contractions has already started, but that contractions are not enough or they are inadequate, and they are because of failed cervical dilatation or the descent of the fetal head. And in that case, whatever the methods we use, they are called as the augmentation of the labor. You got my point? Okay. Shall we proceed? Okay. So what are the different indications for the induction of the labor? Whenever the risk of the continuation of the pregnancy, either to the mother or the fetus, is more. Means if we continue the pregnancy, then there will be the risk to the mother or the fetus. So what kind of risk are these? And depends upon that, there are the indication for the induction of the labor. There are different kinds of the risk. Like in post-maturity. What happens in post-maturity? Post-maturity means if she is a 40 weeks pregnant and she is passing that 40 weeks, still she doesn't go into the labor. Okay, we can safely wait up to the 40 weeks, 41 weeks. Okay, but what happens in Indian scenario? It is better what we follow the protocol. Once she passes her date of the pregnancy, that is expected date of the pregnancy, in all such patients, we usually prefer to induce these patients. Okay. So why we are inducing this patient? Because if we continue the pregnancy, then possibility of passage of the meconium and possibility of complications like What are the complications like the shoulder dystocia? They may increase. Because of that, it is increasing the risk to the mother as well as it is increasing the risk to the fetus. That's why we induce the labor in cases of the post maturity. Either we can say the post date pregnancies. Okay. The same with the PROM. If already membranes are ruptured, in that case, possibility of chorioamnionitis is there and she is term. Then, if we continue the pregnancy, there will be the risk to the mother as well as the fetus. That's why we induce in cases of the PROM. Then, preeclampsia, eclampsia. What is the protocol preeclampsia, eclampsia? If they are having the severe preeclampsia or they are having the eclampsia and the pregnancy is term, either it may be the preterm pregnancy also, we have to induce the labor for the benefit of the mother. Okay, in that case we can ignore the baby also. That depends upon the for what indication we are inducing the labor. Same with the IUGR. IUGR means there is a growth restriction and there is a growth restriction because of some of the factors like the placental insufficiency. Already IUGR is set in, and if we do the 2 ultrasound, if she is 37 weeks pregnant and IUGR is already diagnosed and I am trying to extend that pregnancy that I want to continue up to the 40 weeks. I did ultrasound after 14 days के बाद में. Still there is no growth. Okay, what does it indicate? It is better to take that baby out of the womb rather than continuing the pregnancy. Okay, that will risk the fetus. That is why we have to induce the labor. Same with the abruptio placenta. Abruptio placenta, if we continue the pregnancy, then possibility of intrauterine fetal demise and maternal complications are there. That is why we induce the labor in abruptio placenta. What happens in RHIS immunization? RH negative mothers, once they reach the term pregnancy up to the 40 weeks, we never allow them to go the post-dated or the post-term. Why? The possibility of RHIC immunization increases. That is why we induce such patients. Same with the intrauterine fetal demise. Intrauterine fetal demise, if there is already fetus is died inside the uterus, are we going to wait? No, because it will cause the problem into the mother. What problems it may cause? It may cause the problem with the coagulation system into the mother. That is why it is need to be induced. The labor needs to be induced. Same with the oligohydramnion and the polyhydramnion. There are number of complications. Oligohydramnion के साथ में what complication may happen? More possibility of passage of the meconium with the oligohydramnion because of the pressing of the cord, and as there is a less liquor, the liquor may get that aspiration of meconium will be more with the oligohydramnion. And with the polyhydramnion, the head will not get engaged and that pregnancy will be more distressful, and if that membrane suddenly rupture, then there is possibility of cord prolapse. That is why all these are the factors. And one more factor, important factor, is the maternal medical complications like chronic hypertension, diabetes mellitus, chronic renal disease, and cholestasis of pregnancy. All these are the medical, all these whatever we discussed like the post maturity, PROM, preeclampsia, eclampsia, IUGR, abruptio placenta, RHIS immunization, intrauterine fetal death, oligohydramnion, polyhydramnion, and maternal medical complications. If all these complications are there, and with these complications, if we continue the pregnancy, that will definitely going to harm either the mother or the fetus. And in such conditions, we have to induce the labor. Okay, these are the basically indication for the induction of the labor. Then what are the contraindication for the induction of labor? Okay, so basically whatever is the contraindication for the spontaneous labor or the delivery. You will ask what are the contraindication for the spontaneous labor or the delivery. Whenever we divide these contraindications into the fetal as well as the maternal. Okay, if the fetus size is more, okay, so she should not undergo the spontaneous labor also. because we know that head will not going to go through the pelvis. And multifetal gestations. Multifetal gestations are more prone for the complications. Okay. Severe hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus में क्या हो जाएगा? Basically, they have the breech presentation, and what happens? The breech will come out, but head will get locked at the pelvic inlet, and different malpresentations like the breech presentation, transverse lie, oblique lie. We never try for the spontaneous labor or the delivery. In such patients, we will not try for the induction of labor also. And fetal status is non-reassuring. In that case, definitely we are not going to induce that labor. What are the maternal contraindications for that induction of labor? If that female is having the contracted pelvis, in that case she is not going to deliver vaginally. There is no question of the induction. Then if she is undergone previous classical cesarean section, if she undergone previous hysterectomy, so why we are not inducing such patients? Because already they are more prone for the rupture of the uterus, and if you induce such patient, then more possibility that they will land up into the complications. And then abnormal placentation. If there is a placenta previa, then definitely placenta previa hai to we will not try for the spontaneous labor or the delivery. And likewise, we will not try for the induction of the labor in cases of the placental abnormality, like placenta previa in then abruptio placenta. Definitely we can try for the induction of labor, but not in the placenta previa, not in cases of the vasa previa. Okay. And if there is active genital herpes infection, in that case, if we try for the induction of the labor, then there is more possibility that that baby may get infected with the herpes. Okay. In cases of the cervical cancer, it may cause a space occupying lesion into the cervix. Okay. And there may be the possibility of excessive bleeding PV. That is why we are not trying for the induction of labor, or these are the contraindications, and these are same as for the spontaneous labor and the delivery. Okay. Then you will say why we are not. There is one terminology that is called as the elective induction of the labor. What do you mean by the elective induction of the labor? Means we initiate the labor at term pregnancy without any acceptable medical or the obstetric indication. Why we do that elective induction of the labor? Suppose a patient is there. Okay, she is suppose she is a second gravida. She is 38 weeks pregnant. Okay, and what I am planning to go outside in the next 2 or 3 weeks. In that case, what I will suggest to that patient, that is for my convenience or the practitioner's convenience, and I will ask to that patient, already you are having the term pregnancy, so there is no problem with the fetal lung maturity. Okay, so I will ask that patient and her family what is the convenient time. At that time, we can induce the labor. That is also called as nowadays that concept is very becoming famous. That all the persons, they are admitting the patient after the 38 or 39 weeks after a term pregnancy without any medical or the obstetric indication. The indications we already discussed. What are the indications for the induction? But still there is no indication. They are admitting these patients. What happens if that patient and myself will be in a dilemma when she will go into the labor? Better thing is that we call that patient on a fixed day, morning hours, and we induce that patient. Okay, so that in a daytime she should go in a labor, and at that time we will be more attentive and the complications will be less. That is called as the office obstetrics practice. Okay, and it is basically done for the convenience of the practitioner or the convenience of the patient or her family. But it is not done, not routinely followed in our medical colleges. Okay, private practitioner, more and more private practitioners are adopting this practice. Even in our that Hedgewar Hospital, they are following the induction of the labor as per the convenience of the practitioner and as per the convenience of the family and the patient. They are calling the patient and inducing that patient on a particular day. That will be convenient for both of them. Okay. But why we are not inducing each and every patient? Okay. So these are because of these complications we may face with the induction of the labor. If we induce a patient and she doesn't go into the labor, then what are the options we have with us? If I induced a patient but she doesn't go into the labor, then we have one option, that is the cesarean delivery. Okay, so with the induction of the labor, the failure of induction will be more and more possibility of cesarean delivery. Okay, and if she goes into the spontaneous labor, more possibility that she will deliver vaginally. Okay, and with the induction, which patients are more prone for the cesarean delivery? That is the nulliparous patients. Okay, because what happens in nulliparous patient, because of some unknown factor they are not going into the labor, and we are inducing that patients at term or the post-term pregnancy. Okay, and that mostly depends upon the number of factors whether she will go into the labor or not. But especially nulliparous patients are more prone for having the increased rate of the cesarean delivery. And nulliparous patient may say which patients are more prone for the cesarean section? Those patients that cross the 40 weeks of the gestation and their head is not engaged. Such patients are more and more, even though we induce that patient, they will not go into the labor and they undergo the cesarean section. Okay, and what happens? What are the other complications? There is a possibility of chorioamnionitis. What do you mean by the chorioamnionitis? Whatever the infections, infective organisms are there inside the vagina, they may ascend upwards and they may infect the chorion or the amnion, and it leads to the chorioamnionitis. Because of the manipulations, we are doing the many manipulation for the induction of the labor, and that will increase the possibility of the chorioamnionitis. And as that patient is not going into the spontaneous labor and we are inducing her labor, okay, so after delivery what happens? More possibility that that patient will go into the uterine atony. Okay, means postpartum hemorrhage, chances of postpartum hemorrhage are more in the patient who undergone the induction of the labor. Then what happens if a patient comes to the OPD? Okay, she is having irregular menstrual cycles, and if I ask any resident that you calculate her expected days, and that resident mistakenly calculated her expected date, and she is having the irregular menses. Okay, she is a case of PCOS. Then by her date she is crossing the expected date, but as per the fetal maturity, there may be the possibility that she is 35-34 weeks. Okay, in that case, if we induce such patients because of our mistake, then there may be the possibility of iatrogenic fetal prematurity. Okay, all these possibilities are there. And what happens with the induction? Sometimes patient may go into the hyperstimulation, uterine dysfunction. That may lead to the fetal hypoxia. That may lead to the prolonged labor, and we may need to take the operative interferences as well as. Okay, all these are the complications with the induction of labor. That, elective labor induction we already discussed. And what are the different factors which define the labor induction will be successful? The most important factor is the period of gestation. Means if we are inducing the labor at 34 weeks, and I am inducing the labor at 38 weeks, and if I am inducing another patient at 40 weeks 2 days, then the possibility of which patient is more that she will go into the labor? The third one, that is she has crossed her expected date of delivery, that is the post date patient more probably go into the labor. That is how the success of induction depends upon the period of the gestation. Okay, and the most important factor is the pre-induction cervical scoring. That is, what is the cervical dilatation, what is the effacement, what is the position of the cervix, how the cervix, consistency of the cervix, what is the length of the cervix. All these factors will decide whether that induction will be successful or not. Okay, and as we discussed, if that patient is primiparous, then more possibility she will go into the failure of induction and cesarean delivery. What happens in the multiparous patient? The more probability that there will be the successful induction of the labor. As well as the, if birth weight is more than 3.5 kg, less possibility that that patient will deliver vaginally, and also the BMI less than 30. All these are the factors which will decide the whether our induction of labor will be successful or not. Pre-induction cervical lightening. If a patient is there, she comes to you for the follow-up. So first of all, she is, if consider she is a post-date by 4 days. Okay, she has crossed her EDD by 4 days, and the most important factor what I will consider, that is the pre-induction cervical ripening. Basically, what is that pre-induction cervical ripening? It is the complex biochemical changes that happens into the cervix. It is because of different hormones like estrogen and the progesterone. What happens in the cervix? Cervix is made up of what? What is the main content of the cervix? Only 10 to 15% of the smooth muscle cells, and rest of the cervix is made up of the extracellular matrix, and that extracellular matrix is made up of collagen and the ground substance. Okay, so what happens? Ripening means what happens? There is a rearrangement of the collagen. Okay, structural rearrangement of the collagen, and the some of the ground substances will become dissolved, like the hyaluronic acid, glycosamine glycans, and because of that, ultimately what happens to the cervix? Cervix become soft and pliable. That is called as the ripening of the cervix, and that ripening of the cervix is the most important factor of the success of the induction of the labor. So before the induction of the labor, if that cervix is not ripe, then what we are going to do? We have to first ripe the cervix and then do the induction of the labor. Okay. How will we decide that cervix is ripe or not? For that purpose, we have a Bishop's pre-induction cervical scoring system. Okay. What factor we consider in Bishop's pre-induction cervical scoring system? The most important is the cervical dilatation. Okay. The second most important is the effacement of the cervix. Third is the consistency. Fourth is the position and the station of the fetal head. Okay. If I did a per vaginal examination and her cervix is 3 to 4 centimeter dilated, her effacement is 80%, and her consistency will be soft, and position will be definitely anterior, and station of the head is -1. What will be the score? As I said, dilatation is 3 to 4 centimeter, then 2. Effacement is 80%, then 3. Then consistency is soft, 7. Then position is anterior, 9. And station is -1, 11. Okay. What will be the score? Her Bishop score will be the 11. And that is the good Bishop score. Okay, that is how we judge the pre-induction cervical score. Okay, and what is the modification in that Bishop score? Instead of the effacement, now we started taking the cervical length. Okay, we do the cervical length by the ultrasound, and different numbers are given to that cervical length. Like if it is more than 4 centimeter, between 2 to 4 centimeter, less than 1 centimeter. Okay, and different numbers scorings are given to that. And what is the favorable scoring system then? Maximum scoring will be 13, and favorable score is between 6 to 13. And when we call it as unfavorable, if that score is less than 5 and less than 5, then we call it as a unfavorable cervix. Okay, in that unfavorable cervix, there is a role of the pre-induction cervical ripening. Okay, what happens? We were discussing about a patient. She is a 40 weeks 3 days pregnant. Okay, I did her per vaginal examination. Okay, suppose her os is closed and her effacement is 40 to 50%, but cervix is medium in consistency, midline in position, station is -2. Okay, so her score will be definitely less than 5. Okay, so if her score is less than, that is the Bishop score, if it is less than 5, then we will consider it as an unfavorable cervix. In that case, there is the role of the pre-induction cervical ripening. Okay, so what are the different agents they are available for the cervical ripening? These are the different agents, like the pharmacological as well as the non-pharmacological. Okay, we are going to discuss all these agents in the induction of the labor again, like prostaglandins, oxytocin, progesterone receptor antagonist, relaxin, hyaluronic acid, and estrogen. And non-pharmacological agents like stripping of membranes, amniotomy, mechanical dilators, and transcervical balloon catheters. All these are the agents. First, we will cause the ripening of the cervix, and then we will induce that patient. If she is a 40 weeks 3 days and her scoring is less than 5, what I will do? I may put a transcervical, as her os is closed, I may put a transcervical balloon catheter like the Foley's catheter. Okay, and at the same time I will put a dinoprostone gel, and I will wait for the cervix to ripe for the 24 hours. Okay, once that cervix is ripe, then I will start the induction of that patient. Okay, if the ultrasound examination is of that patient or Doppler study is normal, that is called as a pre-induction cervical ripening. Okay, now we will discuss about what are the different methods available for the induction of the labor: medical, surgical, and the combined. So medical may, what are the different methods available? Prostaglandins like PGE2, PGE1, oxytocin, mifepristone. And surgical may, there is artificial rupture of the membranes, there's stripping of the membranes, and mechanical cervical dilatation. Or we can combine all these methods. Okay, these are the different methods available for the induction of the labor. Medical methods may, most commonly used are the prostaglandins. So which prostaglandins we can use? Either PGE2, PGE1, or the prostaglandin F2 alpha. Prostaglandin F2 alpha is mostly used for the induction of abortion. It is not used for the induction of the labor. Okay. So we are using the PGE2 and PGE1. PGF2 alpha predominantly act on the, basically these prostaglandins are the local hormones. They act in a paracrine or the autocrine action. What do you mean by the paracrine autocrine? PGF2 alpha is produced by the decidua. It get absorbed into the blood circulation and it will act on the myometrium. That is called as a paracrine action. And what in autocrine? That PGE2 is produced by the amnion and it will act on the cervix. It will cause the, because of the collagenolytic property, it will cause the dilatation of the cervix, and it will help myometrium becomes more receptive for the oxytocin. That is the role of the PGE2. Okay. So dinoproston gel, that is the PGE2 gel. Have you seen these photographs? Okay. You must have seen these PGE2 gels into the labor room. That is this one is the packet. It contains the 0.5 milligram of the PGE2 or the dinoprostone. The total weight of that gel inside this plunger is 3 gram. Okay, we have to remove this cap and we have to put this cap from the behind, and at the front there is always a small needle like structure. Okay, so what we do, that PGE2 gel is the gold standard for the cervical ripening. How we do the PGE2 gel insertion? We have to put our 2 fingers inside the cervix and we have to insert that whole assembly, and the injecting that needle should go beyond the internal os, and with the help of plunger we will push all that 3 gram content inside the cervix. Okay, that is the intracervical. You should not go beyond the internal os. It should be intracervical instillation of the PGE2 gel. If once we put that gel and she doesn't go in labor, then we have to wait for the 6 hours. What we will do in that 6 hours? We will monitor the uterine activity. We will monitor the fetal heart rate. एक जेल डाल दिया, if she doesn't go in labor, then we can put 3 to 4 extra doses. Okay, as we discussed earlier, agar uska cervix is not ripe, in that case what we will do, we will put her a gel, we will wait for 24 hours, and after 24 hours we will put another extra 3 gels. Okay, in total we can put a 4 gels, and after 4 gels she doesn't go into the labor, then we can call it as a failure of the induction. Once we put that dinoprostone gel, we have to ask patient to wait in a bed for 30 minutes so that the gel should not come out. Okay. What are the different side effects like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, bronchospasm, shivering, fever, malaise? All these are the minor systemic complications. Main complication with the gel is the uterine tachysystole, or there is possibility of uterine rupture. Okay, what is the tachysystole, what is the hyperstimulation, that we are going to discuss after the prostaglandins. Okay, what are the contraindications? Mainly the hypersensitivity to the drug and previously scarred uterus and bronchial asthma, as prostaglandins may cause the sudden bronchospasm, and these are the all contraindicated into the terminal heart disease, liver disease. Okay, and one more, that is the tool available for the induction of the labor is the misoprostol, that is the PGE1, that is mostly used for the cervical ripening. That is the misoprostol tablet, prostaglandin E1 tablet. That tablet for the induction are available in a 25 microgram dose. Okay, we have to take these tablets on our finger and moist that tablet with the normal saline, and we have to keep that tablet into the posterior fornix. From there they will get absorbed and they will cause the cervical ripening, followed by the contraction of the uterus. So what is the advantage of using that PGE1 over the PGE2? It is a cheap, and as it is available in the tablet form, it is stable at room temperature. But prostaglandin E2 gel we have to keep into the refrigerators. If we keep that tablet, they have the long shelf life. Tablets are very easy to administer. There are less side effect with the prostaglandin E1 tablet, and induction delivery interval will be short. Okay, with the PGE1. Main side effects with the PGE1 is the possibility of hyperstimulation, and because of the hyperstimulation, passage of the meconium is more, and more possibility that uterus may rupture. That is why we are using the prostaglandin E1 tablet in a 25 microgram. Otherwise, for the PPH, we use the prostaglandin E1 in a 200 microgram dose. Okay. For the induction of labor, we are using only 25 microgram. Okay. And that we can use either vaginally or the orally. These are the terminologies like the uterine tachysystole, uterine hypertonus, and uterine hyperstimulation. What do you mean by the tachysystole? If we insert the PGE2 gel or PGE1 gel and there are more than 6 contractions coming in 10 minutes, then it is called as a uterine tachysystole. And if a single contraction that is lasting more than 2 minutes, then it is called as a uterine hypertonus. And when we will call it as a hyperstimulation, when either uterine tachysystole or the hypertonus is leading to the non-reassuring fetal heart sound. Okay, it is affecting the fetal heart sound, then we will call it as the uterine hyperstimulation. PGE2 gel and PGE1. PGE1 may there are more possibility of that patient may go into the uterine hyperstimulation as well as the rupture of the uterus. That's why we need to be more careful. Okay. What about the oxytocin? How that oxytocin act? Oxytocin act through the there are number of receptors. Okay, one is the G protein coupled receptor and second one is the phosphoinositol. In that receptor there is a calcium as a second messenger. They will cause the uterine smooth muscle contractions. And oxytocin also release the prostaglandins and leukotrienes. Okay, that is how the oxytocin, once we give the oxytocin, it will augment the labor by its direct action through the G protein coupled receptors, and it will also release the prostaglandins. Okay. What happens during the labor or the pregnancy? First trimester mein there will be the no oxytocin receptor, but second trimester onward oxytocin receptor number will start increasing. At the labor there is 100 to 200 fold increase in the number of the oxytocin receptors. Okay, and oxytocin will increase the synthesis of the prostaglandins, and that is how it will increasing the uterine contractions. Okay, and mifepristone can also be used for the induction of the labor, as it is a antiprogesterone. If we give it in a 200 milligram vaginally for 2 days, it will help in the ripening of the cervix. And surgical methods, we know the surgical methods like the ARM, that is the artificial rupture of the membranes or the low rupture of the membranes. Okay, how that artificial rupture or the low rupture of the membranes will induce the labor? That is, after that causes the stretching of the cervix, it will separate the membranes and it will reduce the amniotic fluid. That is how they will start synthesizing the prostaglandins and they will induce the labor. Okay, so what is the advantage of ARM? We can see the liquor, we can see whether meconium is passed, whether there is blood into the meconium. We can fetal blood sampling can be taken, we can put in a fetal electrode or intrauterine pressure scan we see. Okay, that is how that amniotomy, there are benefits or the advantages of the amniotomy. Amniotomy should not be done in cases of the HIV or the herpes infection cases. Okay, and what are the hazards of ARM? There is possibility of cord prolapse, there may be the possibility of amnionitis, there may be the accidental injury to the placenta, blood vessel, that is vasa previa, and sudden there may be the possibility of amniotic fluid embolism. These are the hazards with the ARM. And you must be heard about the stripping of the membranes. What we do in stripping of the membranes, we insert our fingers and we just digitally separate the chorioamniotic membranes from the cervix as well as the uterus, lower uterine segment. That is called as the stripping of the membranes. Okay, so because of the separation of the membranes, endogenous prostaglandins are released from the membranes as well as the deciduum, and they will cause the induction of the labor. And mechanically we can use the Foley's catheter. We can put the Foley's catheter beyond the internal os and we can mechanically dilate the cervix, and at the same time it will separate the membranes. Okay, and hygroscopic cervical dilators are also there. They can be used for the cervical ripening. Okay, the last part is the combined methods. We can combine all these methods together. What is the advantage? It will reduce the induction delivery interval. We can use oxytocin with ARM, or ARM followed by the oxytocin, or we can use the prostaglandins followed by the oxytocin. Okay, so why it is advantageous combined method? Because it is more effective than the single method, and it will shorten the induction delivery interval. From the induction to the delivery time will be less, and it will minimize the risk of infection. It will reduce the period of observation. Thus, the fetal and the maternal complications will be less with the combined methods. Okay.